Yoga is a powerful tool for revealing the truth about yourself, about other people, and about the world. But this requires a sincere effort on the part of the practitioner to engage in a practice of real honesty. Quite often, however, yoga can actually become an escape mechanism where we fail to face up to the difficulties and challenges in our own lives. And, or even worse, we ignore and close our eyes to injustice and end up using our seemingly lofty notions to actually gaslight people out of their suffering. This is what we can call spiritual bypassing. Spiritual bypassing is a term that was come up with by an American psychologist called John Welwood in the mid-1980s to describe when people resort to spirituality to avoid facing up to difficult or painful emotions or situations in their life, and suppress parts of themselves and fail to actually progress and kind of develop emotionally, and you could say also spiritually. I guess it's a way of being afraid of dealing with the raw and the messy aspects of our lives by saying, it's okay, I'm a spiritual person, I'm doing my practice, everything is fine. It's denial. And sadly, this is something that we see quite often in the yoga world. Spiritual bypassing in the context of yoga is using your practice as an avoidance from the problems of the world or of your problems, instead of actually using the practice to tackle them, which is what it was designed for. So how does spiritual bypassing show up in yoga? I like to think of it, the classic thing that I always think of is what I call the love and light phenomenon, where yoga practitioners and teachers kind of wish each other love and light and peace and love, and they have a real positivity bias and think that they're supposed to only talk about positive things and be perfect. And this is actually very dangerous because it gives a really bad example, if we're talking about the part of a teacher, that it doesn't encourage you to actually tackle the difficulty in your life. It also means that you're not able to develop the tools and the tactics that yoga actually provides to us, which we would use actually to take apart problematic issues and even to face the difficulties which inevitably arise in your practice. Because a yoga practice, I mean, if you've done asana or breathing or meditation, you notice that as soon as you do your practice, you turn towards yourself and things arise, things come up. And those things are sometimes, sometimes yoga makes you feel good, but sometimes not. Yoga reveals to us the reality of what's actually there, if we are ready to see it. So the yoga system and the yoga philosophy, clearly it gives us a lot of, positive and admirable qualities that we would strive towards. For example, the number one yogic principle is that of ahimsa, translated most often as non-harming. So you can say that ahimsa is all about, being peaceful and not being violent. And that's kind of one aspect of it. But sometimes that can be interpreted to be avoiding conflict. And the thing is that, yeah, conflict for its own sake is not good, but sometimes we need to actually confront a problematic situation. I think about this all the time when I'm working with the Bhagavad Gita, for example, which, as you know, has been on my desk quite a lot recently. The Bhagavad Gita is all about standing up and engaging in the fight that's in front of you, of dealing with the problems that face you, not turning away cowardly or running away to the mountains as Arjuna wants to do, citing ahimsa and citing he doesn't want to be violent against his own loved ones. But as Krishna points out, you have to stand up when Dharma calls you. There's actually a scholar and philosopher called Shyam Ranganathan who translates ahimsa as the disruption of systematic harm. So it actually means that ahimsa, non-violence, it doesn't mean not engaging in violence. It means doing everything actively in your power to cultivate harmony, to make peace, to construct peace, to fight for peace, if you will. In this way, and this is crucial, yoga is not a passive practice. It's something where you have to stand up and engage. And that's like one of the main messages of the Bhagavad Gita is stand up and be in your life. At the very beginning of chapter 2, Krishna says, you should never yield to cowardice, O Partha. It does not suit you. Abandon this lowly faintness of heart, stand up, scorcher of the foe. So Arjuna represents the part of all of us that can stand up and be courageous and show up for ourselves in our life. You could say that he's a warrior, I'm not a warrior, but that Arjuna represents, common man. And he represents the fact that all of us have the power to actually have agency in our lives. Yoga is not about martyrdom. It's all about being active, taking an active role and taking responsibility in your own life. One of the other reasons why sometimes you can think that yoga encourages that positivity mindset and there's this danger of spiritual bypassing, there's this verse in chapter 2 of the sutras that says, if you have negative thoughts, you should cultivate counteracting thoughts. Which kind of could be like, if you're depressed, just think positive. So how well does that work? I can tell you it never worked well for me. And this is basically, it shows you the danger of how you interpret something, or not the danger, but you should be careful about how you interpret something and make sure that you interpret it in the context of the full text that you're looking at, or indeed the tradition that you're looking at. It's not very Patanjalian to say, oh, just deny the negative things that are happening in your life and just think positive and just put a smile on your face, fake it till you make it. That's not very Patanjali, is it? So I would interpret this verse instead as turning left instead of right. If you always do what you've always done, then you're always going to get what you always got. So if something is leading you in a bad direction, why not try something else? That's how I understand it. We're coming at these Yoga Sutras without the background of the very rich tradition of philosophy and logic and reason, which actually underpins the whole yogic system. There's a whole system of scholarship, which is and of thinking, which underlies how the sutras are supposed to be interpreted. And we in the West, when we read one yoga book about the Yoga Sutras, we're lacking all of that. So there's a danger of interpreting the verses to make them fit what we want them to mean. A classic example of this is when we talk about brahmacharya, one of the yamas, which is all about celibacy and the skillful use of sexual energy, which in its literal translation means basically not having sex. Or at least, having a responsible attitude to your sexual activities. And when people in the West who like to have sex, they don't like to interpret that. So they try to translate it as exercising moderation, which is quite a loose interpretation. I'm not saying that one or other is correct, but I think that we just should be aware of when we're bringing our own biases and prejudices to how we approach the tradition. How much are we trying to bend it to fit what we want it to mean? That is spiritual bypassing. And that actually is cultural appropriation. So another way that this shows up is when people say, oh, but we're all interconnected, or everything is one, in order to deny injustice and privilege. Or equally when people say that the material world doesn't exist, it's just Maya, to deny good or evil actions or to deny people's suffering. Well, the material world is as real as we can experience it. And so it's what right do we have to deny someone else's suffering by writing it off as something illusory? In fact, the very interconnectedness of stuff shows that our very actions do matter. And karma is not a justification for explaining why someone is in a bad situation. On the other hand, it's on the contrary, it's actually a proof that we have the responsibility to do better, to try and make the world a better place. The danger of saying that good and evil don't exist is that we pretend our actions don't have moral repercussions when they do. We often hear criticisms of the Bhagavad Gita saying that it can be a justification for war just because it takes place on a battlefield. And I'll read you one of my favorite verses that I've quoted here before, and we'll see how it could easily be interpreted as a justification for basically anything. One whose buddhi is integrated, even here in the world, throws off both good and evil actions. Therefore, yoke yourself to yoga. Yoga is the art of skillful action. The thing is that this verse, if you take it out of context, it looks like you say, well, good and evil doesn't exist, just do what you want, be skillful, and you could interpret that with your own definition of what skillful is. But actually, if you read it within the context of the Bhagavad Gita and in the context of the Mahabharata and in the context of the yoga tradition, you know that what this phrase buddhi yuktaha actually means. We talked about it a couple of videos ago, about actually bringing yourself into harmony and bringing your conscious awareness, your buddhi, over all of the actions that you do and of your intentions and your motivations and understanding everything that makes up your personality. When you actually engage in that, the side effect of it is that you realize that good and evil are actually classifications that are a bit more extreme than reality tends to manifest as. What does that really mean? It means that our attachment to designating an action as good or bad sometimes can be quite short-sighted in terms of the further repercussions of things. However, it doesn't mean that you can just willy-nilly do what you want. It's within the context of dharma and ethics. The yoga tradition and the yoga practice only works if you practice it. The yoga is intended to be something that you apply to your life, you apply to your thoughts, you apply to your actions and your words. And this very verse only works if you actually stop and deal with your own issues. That's what the Bhagavad Gita is inviting us to do. When you really practice, yoga asks you to look deeply at what you are carrying around with you, your baggage, your unconscious habits, your samskaras, your limiting beliefs, and your pain, and how that affects how you behave in the world. The feelings that we feel are not there to be ignored. It's the way that we live in the Western world right now. Sometimes having strong feelings and pain and stuff is a bit inconvenient, especially if you have to show up and go to work. But the thing is that our anxieties, our miseries, our worries and our concerns are often there to tell us that something is wrong, isn't working out. It's trying to draw our attention to something that we are supposed to address. But what we often can do, especially in the yoga world, is that we deal with the symptom. So you deal with the anxiety by calming yourself down, or you do your practice and you start to feel a bit more harmonious in your body and your life without necessarily addressing the root cause of what is making you feel anxious or depressed or upset. It means that we end up perpetuating the situation that's causing the pain. Now, this is true of individuals as well as society. As a society, we have loads of ways of just like cancelling out the pain or ignoring things, or indeed cancel culture, where we decide that one person is evil and they're bad. But actually, it's never as simple as that. Obviously, there's systematic issues which are causing problems to arise. I really like, this isn't a quote from a yoga text, but it's a quote from a book which I really love, which is Emergent Strategy by Adrienne Marie Brown. She says, to transform the conditions of the wrongdoing, we have to ask ourselves and each other, why? Especially when we are scared of the answer. It's easy to decide a person or group is shady, evil, psychopathic. The hard truth, because there's no quick fix, is that long-term injustice creates most evil behavior. The whole thing is that spiritual bypassing, it happens when you understand, even subconsciously, that the problem is way bigger than you can deal with in this present moment, and it's going to take work. And you have to turn towards yourself again and again. Now, the thing is, it's not all bad, as always. The very same yoga tradition provides us with plenty tools to deal with the problem of spiritual bypassing and to stand up and see the truth and to fight against injustice. We already spoke about ahimsa, which is cultivating harmony or disrupting systemic harm. And then right after that, in the Yama system of Patanjali, we have satya, which means truth. As I began, yoga is a beautiful practice for revealing the truth, because the practice and the tradition asks us to turn towards what's real. When you do your physical practice, you encounter your body. You get to know what's really going on there when you bring your awareness to what you feel and what you can do. You can't deny if you can touch your toes or you can't. That's it. In the same way, when you sit in your meditation practice, what you really think and what you really feel will arise and it will come up. The thing is that we have to be strong enough to sit with that. And all of the tools of the yoga practice, which make us physically strong, but also make our nervous system more resilient, and also make our mind more focused, all of these tools are there to actually help us stand up and show up for the practice of sitting with discomfort. Sitting with discomfort and embracing imperfection. When we practice yoga, we realize that perfection doesn't exist. That's ironic. Okay, perfection doesn't exist. And it allows us to be a lot more chill about just letting things unfold as they really need to and as they really want to. Yoga encourages the practice of non-attachment, which is a wonderful antidote to the capitalistic mindset, which needs everything to be perfect and productive all of the time. We also cultivate discernment, which allows us to find the balance between wallowing in our suffering and our problems and working with our issues. It also gives us the power to hold space for other people's pain and discomfort. And I don't mean that we take on their pain like a burden, but we're just strong enough in ourselves to be able to be with them when they're not okay. Instead of denying what they're feeling, like, oh, cheer up, we're all one. We're all interconnected. You're really Brahman. It doesn't really matter what you're feeling. No, being able to listen and being able to hear people and hear their problems and their suffering is the first step to actually making positive changes. We learn to work with what our feelings are instead of denying them, our own feelings and the feelings of the people around us. With the yoga practice, we are asked to not deny what's really going on and the problems, but actually to sort them out. We cultivate presence, we cultivate humility, we cultivate courage, so that we can cut through discomfort and maybe catch a glimpse of the truth. And this is something which makes life feel really meaningful, because we go beyond the drudgery and the denial and the constant repetition of perpetuating the same problems over and over again. And we feel what it feels like to actually make progress and to help each other, which is an absolutely beautiful thing. So let us stand up. Let us face the truth. Let us be courageous so that we can have a beautiful, meaningful life and help each other. Om Shanti.